you think would be useful?
So,
To have study groups, to maybe do a hackathon or two, and just, this is your group, and we'll make it whatever feels good and fun and useful for everyone here. But tonight we are very pleased to welcome two of the principals from a very new startup called Coil. This is Stefan Thomas. He was last known to be the CTO of Ripple, working on a protocol called Interledger. And a couple months ago, he broke off to start his own startup. He's here to share with you how Coil is going to create a new business model, not just for the decentralized web, but for the entire web. So, Stefan.
Perfect. Thank you, Wendy. This title slide, like the color looks different every single time I give the presentation. Like this time it's almost like red. I've seen purple, pink, and I'm sure for the online people it's different as well. Basically what I want to talk about is more the open side of what we're doing. So I won't spend too much time talking about the product that Coil is building, but we're building it on an open protocol. And so I want to share a little bit about what that open standard looks like, and it's based on Interledger. So you've heard that term a few times, so maybe I can talk a little bit about that. But what's the problem that we're trying to solve with web monetization? So today, if you go to the New York Times, you'll get something that looks kind of like this. And if you were to color in like where's the content versus where are the ads, then you can see that there's actually very little content on the front page unless you scroll down. And when you scroll down, of course, that triggers other ads that pop up on top of the thing and so on. And so understandably, a lot of users are very frustrated with the web today. And so more and more users are using ad blockers as a way to kind of protest or opt out, or just because it's almost necessary now. And so ad blocking growth is still going exponential. And for a while, people thought it would kind of flatten off because people were more and more using the mobile web, and there weren't as many options for ad blocking. But there's already companies that are jumping in and kind of providing that. Like, Apple even like provides a native way to do ad blocking on iOS now. So we see that trend continuing. And of course, that creates problems for the creators because you have to pay your journalists and you have to somehow make money. And so, this is a quote from the CEO of the New York Times saying like, hey, you should be paying for the content that you're consuming. And it's hard to not see like some point to that. And then of course, like a lot of adblock users feel guilty because they're not supporting the websites. And especially if you like read some blog or something, you know that they're barely able to make ends meet, but you're not the part of the audience that they make money off of. It's not a great situation for either side. And so kind of to put this into a graphic, like the way it works today is like I go to a website and I request the content and I get back the content, but then I also get some crap that I didn't want, right? And so with a few notable exceptions, such as the archive, like this is kind of how a lot of the web works today. And so we were thinking like, what if it was more like, when you go grocery shopping, where it's like, I get the stuff I wanted and I pay for it. And it seems like a pretty straightforward idea. And when you look in the history of the web, for instance, if you look at the HTTP spec, it actually has this like section where it's talking about an error code just before 404, which is payment required. And so, this code is reserved for future use. Well, the future is here. We want to provide something that can use that code. And we want to provide a way for people as they're browsing the web to basically pay for their usage. So you do a search, you pay for the search. Simple.
What's 403?
403 is forbidden. You don't have permission to access it.
What is 401?
401, unauthorized. It's a different kind of forbidden. All right. So in order to make this happen, like, well, why didn't it get built into the internet in the first place and the web in the first place? Because there wasn't like an open protocol for moving money around, right? There wasn't like a way that you could say like, oh, here's how you pay for an HTTP request. We're tying into financial protocol X. And so I was involved for a long time in Bitcoin, and I thought that Bitcoin could be sort of the answer. But the issue is that Bitcoin is a very opinionated system, right? So there are people that hold the actual Bitcoins. And so you want to buy into that system that has a certain kind of distribution, it has certain values, and it has a lot of things kind of predetermined. And then also, from working on it, I noticed that it evolved a lot slower than some of the systems that I was used to working in, i.e. the web. Like on the web, I was able to deploy several times a day, experiment, do all kinds of crazy stuff, and no one could really tell me anything or not to do that. But with Bitcoin, if you make a change, it affects the whole network most of the time. Like if you want to change how authentication works, if you want to change how the economics work or anything like that, affects everyone. And so Evan and I, we started a project called IntelLedger about 4 years ago. And basically thinking about like, okay, how can we make something that solves payments, but that works a lot more like the internet, where I can do something over here, like I can make my own Wi-Fi protocol and deploy it on my own network without you having to give me permission, without it affecting you in any way, and create that same kind of experimentation that we see with the internet and with the web. And so basically what IntelLedger is, it's a community group at W3C, which is a bit of a weird place to put it, but that's where it is. And it has about 340 individual contributors, but they come from like very different backgrounds, so they bring like a lot of interesting perspectives. And the protocol is at a point where it's like totally working. And so the reason it might not be done, but it's totally working. And so we started Coil as a way to build kind of products that use this. And the first use case that we thought was the most interesting was this idea of web monetization, because it is such a big problem. And it also ties very nicely, and that's why we're here, ties very nicely into a lot of the other projects that people are doing, where like, if I want to host my if I want to host my content on a distributed system, how do those servers actually get paid for? And so having a decentralized kind of protocol that can use any ledger, can use any token, or even like fiat currencies, is a great way to do that, right? So you have a way for the users to pay the website, but then also the website has a way to pay for the servers and things like that. So you can really build those kinds of things very easily. And now I want to jump into a demo, and I'm actually trying to finish a little bit ahead of time so we have a little bit more time for questions, because I think that's more interesting. But so basically what I want to show you is, so I'll use our product as the example, but again, like someone could build their own version of this to give access to the protocol. But basically we've made a service where you can subscribe and you pay a monthly fee. And then as you browse the web, we pay the websites. So like you go to a website and we pay. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So here's a website called fineartglobe.com. And so you'll see this like tiny little thing in the bottom left. And I can actually zoom in a little bit. And so this is kind of the amount of money that I've been paying since I started looking at this website. And so the longer I'm on the site, I can browse to different pages, this will keep counting up. And so what's happening is that I'm a COIL member, and so COIL is actually the one that's paying for the site. And we thought that that was really important to make the product that way, because that way the user doesn't have to worry about paying too much or paying the wrong person or anything like that. In the future, we'll give a lot more control about like, oh, I don't want to pay this site, I don't want to support them, things like that. But we just wanted to make it so that there's no risk for the user. But if I don't like how COIL is doing it, I can create my own provider ties directly into IntelliLedger, and I can pay the site myself. Or I can go with a competitor of COIL's. So the protocol itself is totally open. And so one of the things that I'm really interested in exploring is like, what you could use this for is you could say, okay, here's a website, let's say the decentralized version of Archive, and we have to have a way for all the servers to get paid at the end of the day. Like somewhere someone is running a server and they're paying for it. And we could use donations, but it would be great if the users who are going to the archive and using it are actually the ones like supporting it as well. And so if the archive was web monetization enabled, or the centralized archive was web monetization enabled, then the users would basically go to the sites, they would pay to the archive, and the archive could then pay using IntelliLedger to all these different services that they were using for the actual servers. So that's kind of the economies that we want to help create with this. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Ben really quick, who's going to show like another demo how you could make like an application that uses this. All right. I'll just put it on the table. Yeah, but if it's close by.
Here, I can. Yeah, so Stefan just showed how web monetization works on sort of a static site. So, instead of putting some ads on there, you've just got donations that are basically coming in from COIL through web monetization. But you might also want an application that requires payment because, for example, an upload site, it costs money to store these files that you're uploading, and so the user would be paying for that. So if I go here and I want to upload a file, I can basically select a file off of my machine. It's like, just a normal upload site, but I've also got, I can also enter payment details for InterLedger. And so this is kind of a service that actually integrates more deeply with the sort of web monetization InterLedger ecosystem, because not only do I pay to upload files here, I can create a service that users will also pay to download the files that I've put there, and I'll get paid as a content creator. So it sort of creates these dynamics of like, an entire economy where people are paying and getting paid through InterLedger. So I'll just upload this file here, and it's using the money that COIL has paid to the site to actually fund this upload. Right now, this is using Google Cloud on the back end, just Google Cloud Storage. But you could use something like, you could conceptualize a system like maybe IPFS or something like that, where the people hosting the files are also getting paid over InterLedger to host them in whatever currency they want to use. And so now if I want somebody to download it, I can share them this link, and they'll be paying to the site, downloading it. And then what I can show over here is...
How do you know that it only works when you're paying?
Well, I can show over here that I actually got the money from downloading it from the site. And so it's come in... well, it takes a few seconds to come in. But basically, you've got the price of the file that you downloaded ends up in a wallet of mine that's InterLedger enabled.
Right. The second question. I'll go running to whoever. Any questions? Oh.
right, so I have two questions. One, so you demonstrated two models, so I can assume that you could have any arbitrary model for what the payment is. So if I had a game, I could pay on how many lives I've led or how many people I've killed or whatever, or driven in my car or whatever. It's completely arbitrary what these payment things are, right?
So the way we're thinking about it at the moment is that if you want to pay like every site you go to, every article you read, every video you watch, then approving every payment would get very tedious, right? And so we think that from the user's perspective, they want a very frictionless experience. And so what we're doing right now is we're basing it off of time. So you can kind of saw it was sort of streaming money at a constant rate. And so where I think there's a ton of flexibility is on the website side in terms of like what experience that they want to give you given the rate that you pay your payments at. And the way we arrived at that was that if we ask the website to tell the browser how much to pay, then the website is always just going to try to figure out how to tell the browser to pay the absolute most that it would be willing to pay. And so we just started there. We said, you know, the website just says, here's where you pay, and then the browser starts paying at the maximum rate. And then the website decides what do they want to do with that. And that creates this sort of interesting interplay between the browser or the user and the website or the publisher, because you know websites will want to incentivize the user to pay more, obviously. So they might say like, hey, you know, if you have a higher bandwidth, you might get, you know, this extra feature, or you might get this like extra piece of content, or we might turn off ads if you're above a certain bandwidth. And on the user side, they might say like, hey, if you turn off ads, we might pay more bandwidth. So for instance, like Coil, we might say our default bandwidth is higher for sites that have no ads than for sites that do. And so that creates an incentive for the site to actually turn off the ads. Otherwise, they could just keep the ads and make money on top of that. So there's a kind of a lot of things to be explored in terms of like the interplay between the user and the site.
Can the user dynamically increase the flow of the bits and get more gameplay or whatever?
So if you use web monetization directly, like let's say we have an open source implementation of it. So if you were using that, you can do literally whatever you want. You can write whatever code you want that does whatever you want. If you're a Coil user, right now we don't have that feature, but we are definitely planning to have a button or something where you can hold it pressed and it gives you like a boost or something like that. Or like it just increases the bandwidth for that site because you like liked it or you clapped for it or things like that.
All right, my second question has to do with Brave.
Okay.
So how would you typify the difference between Brave, which I call an attention marketplace, and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so there's a couple differences, and like, you know, I don't want to speak badly about anyone, but like basically Brave is using a specific token. So like all the users are paying all the sites with a token. And so it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, me not wanting people to be forced into one particular token over another. And so with Interledger, it's totally neutral. Like the user can use one token, the website can use another. Neither of them might be the token that Coil uses. So there's nothing kind of built in that you have to buy into. The other thing, just in terms of how it works today, what we showed was a JavaScript Browser Api. So it's basically the website talking to the browser. Whereas Brave right now, it's like you have to verify with Brave, the company, and in order to receive money. And so what we showed, like that can work without Coil being in the picture at all. So it's, I would argue it's more decentralized.
Since you're involved with Ripple, didn't Ripple invent, I want to say XRP or some kind of thingy?
Yeah, so Ripple has a...
Use that?
Ripple has a token, and Coil uses that for settling, but that's just what we do. And so if you wanted to use the same standard, you wanted to use Interledger, you wanted to use web monetization, you could choose to settle with something else.
There's been a puzzle for me that I haven't been able to figure out, and which is how, let's see, it's can you make a decentralized purchase on the decentralized web? And so here's the use case that I've posed, and I just can't figure it out. So let's say my son has got a band and he's kind of awesome, and he gives away one MP3 in a just away, but he has so this little website is one album, decentralized website is one song free, and the other are encrypted. And he just posts this to the decentralized web. And he basically wants, if a coin is dropped in a slot, that they would be given the key that they could go and decrypt the rest of the album. And yeah, they could package it up and make, put it up on the net again, but I don't know how you get around that. But at least, can we make that act of the decentralizing of the encrypted files? Yes. The putting a coin in a slot, and then getting a key back seems to require an entity, an escrowy thing that knows a secret. If you have a mechanism of trying to make it so people can sell things on the decentralized web, that would be excellent. Can't figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have an opinion about that. I might hand the microphone to some other people to hear some other opinions, but my opinion on that is I'm a huge fan of Creative Commons. So Creative Commons is so great because it's so frictionless. The only problem with it is you make no money with it, right? Like, you might get extra exposure, but you don't get paid. And so I was like, what if you, we had this idea of like, what if you had a way to tag a file, not with, you can use this for free, but with, you can use this if you tip me a little bit, right? And so I think that by the very nature of data, you can't really stop people from copying your data and not paying you, right? And I think DRM is never going to work. There's no encryption you can come up with that someone's not going to break. And so what I think is a better approach is to say that the payment is voluntary, but it's very small, it's a very reasonable price. And I think a lot of people would want to support the artists. And like, that's kind of what we're finding. Like right now, Coil doesn't give you any benefit, and yet we have a 5,000 user wait list just from people who want to support the web. And so I think that there are plenty of people that artists could use to make money if they just tag their files and they say like, hey, here's the Interledger payment point that you can tip me at. And it's just so seamless and frictionless. And if you have a cloud subscription, it doesn't even cost you anything extra beyond the subscription. I think you can get to a point where this is something people would do.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the file upload demo I was showing is sort of a similar idea to that, where basically, you've got a file that you're uploading, and you could imagine it as maybe you're uploading it to a node in a distributed file hosting system. And so when somebody asks to pull down that file, they send some payment over Interledger, maybe not a distributed, like maybe not a payment that is going to a decentralized system, but to that particular node. And that node receives the payment and passes it on to the creator, because that location where the creator gets paid is sort of a part of the system.
All right.
Let's hear it for the two founders of Coil. We're going to have Kalia set up over here, and while she's setting up over here, I'm going to ask John Kunze to come up. John is a librarian technologist, our favorite kind of person, and he's here to talk about something that we know near and dear to us, which is decentralized, DOIs. DOIs rule the world of libraries, and they're used in a way that could be better. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Wendy. The could be better is the non-DOI, the ARC, the archival resource key. But this is about URLs breaking and their habit of breaking, which is very unfortunate, and what we can do about it. So imagine the internet before the web took hold. All mainstream content for articles, books, music had to rely on publishers. With the web, suddenly anyone could easily publish their own content. There was an incredible feeling of liberation. They didn't need to ask anyone. They didn't need to pay anyone, right? There's no permission required. You just advertise the links to your content. URLs were great. This was a web address, right? But not all was well. The average life of a URL was just 44 days. And some people blame the URL itself, kind of like blaming the messenger, when in fact it was the fault of the people who didn't maintain the content behind the URL. So what became clear was that some sort of indirection was needed, something that would help to stabilize links by publishing a link that redirects to the current location, wherever that was, the publish link could remain stable while the content moved. This would become the basis for what people call the persistent identifiers in the academic world. So the indirection notion became kind of an obsession, and various solutions were proposed. It was a dead simple idea. Table lookup plus HTTP redirection was it. What's behind every URL shortener. An early solution was the Perl, the persistent URL. These were free, decentralized, came out of the library world. Another solution was the handle system, which you were supposed to pay for. So imagine the newfound liberation and excitement in a democratized, decentralized publishing world, and then stuff it all back in a box. Route everything, or maybe just the world's most valuable content, through one server, and make people pay for it pay to create persistent identifiers. Later, you could insert ads or erect paywalls if you needed revenue. So anyway, when the handle system was presented to the Internet Standards Group, Larry was there, it was basically laughed off the stage. The Internet Standards Group was struggling in crisis. Like the URL seemed to be broken. We couldn't standardize it because it was broken. Anyway, the standards folks turned around and invented the free and open URN concept, the Uniform Resource Name, and with it the umbrella term URI. Anyway, the handle system, meanwhile, went away looking for someone who understood controlled access and paywalls, and they found our friends, the big publishers. Together, they layered the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier system, on top of the handles. And we now live in a world where all mainstream journal content goes through a centralized, pay-to-play, publisher-controlled choke point. Now, when you get your mind around that, remember they're very successful and they're now poised to control access to all research data as well that's linked to those journals. Publishers are very eager about this because they can now monetize research data as well. We can do better, and we are doing better. So Tim Berners-Lee, when he was asked his opinion, said, well, just use URLs. Cool URLs don't break. This is a great idea, but unfortunately, keeping URLs from breaking takes sweaty work, and the vast majority of URLs aren't worth it. Furthermore, how do you tell which URLs are cool? So the last solution that was proposed was the ARC identifier, this archival resource key, which is essentially URLs that aspire to be cool and that you can query to see if that's actually true. It was the last solution, but it was 17 years ago, so it's not like that recent. It's the only solution that was decentralized from the beginning. It's the only solution that's upfront about the fact that you can't trust an identifier by just looking at it. All the other solutions say, trust us. Someone's wish 17 years ago is now it will be true forever. That's never going to be true. So anyway, ARCs are a solution that based in libraries, museums, and archives. For example, the Internet Archive has 12 million ARCs, the French National Library over 20 million, the Smithsonian has many million. There are 4 million ARCs for dead people, for example. This is like, there's a Facebook for Dead People project where you identify contributors from long ago. There are many millions for genealogical records. ARCs are used for digital files, physical things, people, concepts, groups, etc. In the past 17 years, over 550 organizations have registered to use ARCs, and there are an estimated 175 million. This doesn't sound like a lot, but these are all things that people care about and curate, so that's a big deal. Currently, we're looking to move ARCs from its home at the California Digital Library to be a truly community-owned effort, and we see it fitting perfectly with the DWeb, and would love to see that happen, and would love this group's feedback.
Ask people to give feedback, I think, after the main speakers. So thank you. Thank you, John. So when Kalia stood up and introduced herself, she said that she has been working for a very long time on what has been a holy grail, decentralized identity. I mean, why is it that when you go into a bar and you want to buy a drink, you hand over your driver's license and it tells them how much you weigh and how tall you are and the color of your eyes, and all they really need is your birth date, right? Well, we've been doing something kind of akin to that online for a long time, handing a lot of identity about ourselves to people, and then they keep that identity. Well, Kalia, for 14 years, has been working with a group called the Internet Identity Workshop, IIW. They're going to have their 27th convening. They meet twice a year this coming October. And there's many reasons why she is known around the world as Identity Woman. So please welcome Kalia.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Wendy. That was great. So I'm going to talk to you today about decentralized identity for the decentralized web. And let's just dive in. So there's these things called identifiers, and we have a lot of them. We're invited to log into websites often with different usernames and passwords, and this results us being chopped into lots of little pieces because we have different accounts everywhere, and it's kind of crazy. And the other trouble with this architecture is you end up in someone else's namespace. Everywhere you go, you're like in their space, and they control your username, and they can erase it whenever they want. And more recently, we have these guys, and they're like, hey, log in with us. But then you end up like with them in the middle of like all your stuff, and you can't ever cancel your account with them because then you'd lose access to all these other services that you're logging into. So there's some identifiers. We have URLs. People are like, get a URL, stick everything related to you to that. Well, that sort of works for a blog, like you're writing stuff, but it was never designed to manage your identity and your personal data. That's not what it was built for. It was built to architect a web of pages, and we really rent them. If you don't pay your domain name fee every year, it's gone poof. We rent our phone numbers. If you don't pay your phone bill, you lose your phone number. It's not yours. It's in a nice global namespace. Most of us who can afford to pay our phone bills are like, that's the most important bill I have. If I lose my phone number, I'm hosed. But it's not ours. It's theirs. So there really are no digital identifiers that we own. And so this is this question that my community's been working on for a long time. Without controls of our identifiers, we cannot have control of our personal data. And if we don't own our own digital identifier, and how do we own them, right? And this is the question that I've been working on with a community of really amazing people for over 15 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about that story about how we got to now. So a long time ago and far, far away, in 1999 in the Presidio, right down the street, a group met at Planet Work, convened 50 environmental groups and said, hey, this internet thing's growing really fast. Remember, it's 1999. Maybe we need to think about how it plays a role in addressing the environmental crises that are exponentially increasing as well. Like communications technology that's new, internet, like let's put this stuff together and figure it out. And they came up with two very unsatisfactory answers. One was, hey, we could build a giant portal and we'd all join it and all our members would be a part of it, but then we'd lose our autonomy. Or we can all stay separate. Neither one of these answers was acceptable. And in 2000, they convened this conference, Global Ecology in Information Technology, and out of that came the Link Tank. And the Link Tank met for 18 months and asked this question: what's a missing piece of infrastructure that if we could catalyze it and get it built would make a difference to all these groups supporting them working together? And the answer was user-centric digital identity. And they wrote about it in this paper. And they said underlying this report is the assumption that every individual ought to have the right to control his or her own online identity. You should be able to decide what information about yourself is collected as part of your digital profile, and of that information, who has access to it and different aspects of it. Certainly, you should be able to read the complete contents of your own digital profile. At any time, an online identity should be maintained as a capability that gives the user many forms of control. Without flexible access and control, trust in the system of federated network digital identity will be minimal. A digital profile is not treated by the corporations who host them as the formal extension of the person it represents. But if this crucial data about you is not owned by you, what right do you have to manage its use? A civil society approach to persistent identity is the cornerstone of the Augmented Social Network project. And they wrote this in 2003. That's before Facebook was formed. And they, in that paper, said if we don't get our act together and build open standards for user-centric digital identity, a giant corporation will own all of us. And they do, because we didn't figure it out back then. The vision they painted said that organizations would have identifiers and that individuals would have identifiers. And no, I don't want to share. No, sorry. Slide difficulties. Get it back. And that people would have identity and that you would have open standards for the identifiers and the data exchange in between them. So we could connect on our own terms. And instead of being in one big portal, you would have this intermediate space where the people who are connected to multiple groups would be the bridges between them. And therefore, you would have emergent coordination and collaboration amongst them. And I even got in the game. This is like diagrams of my plans to build distributed social networks that I wrote up before Facebook ever happened. Even got some funders to give me a little bit of money. It was fun. And then during this time, I met some other folks who were also working on these problems. And we convened the first Internet Identity Workshop in 2005. And we've been meeting ever since with lots of whiteboards and conversations. And we invented OpenID, and we were a key container for OAuth. Other protocols you may have heard of, like SCIM, all happened there. JOT, JSON-LD, lots of stuff, all incubated and worked on here. And fast forward to today, we've had some really spectacular results finally. We've got the architecture to do this finally. So to do this, you need to have identifiers that people control and organizations control. And this new architecture is called self-sovereign identity. That causes some problems for governments. They can't even talk to us. We're like, just call it self-managed or self-administered. It'll do. And you have a shared ledger or other immutable data stores or the connective tissue. And at the core of this is this lovely, really long number called the decentralized identifier. And individuals use their digital wallets to create them. And they come with two additional numbers. They come with a public key and a private key. And you keep your private key in a wallet. And then you have the DID, which is the key, and the value, which is the DID document. And it's a JSON-LD document describing the entity identified by the DID. And I'm going to just walk through those core components. So you have the DID itself, the set of public keys for verification, the set of authentication protocols. Oh, it's building all the slides. This is fun. Authentication protocols, a set of service endpoints. Sorry. A timestamp and a signature. Sorry. And this is what it looks like in an example of it. So this is what is contained in the DID document. Now, this is a simple sort of routing architecture to support these identifiers having public keys and endpoints. So now anybody can create a DID. They're sort of like infinitely free. There's no limits on them. You don't have to go get them in a namespace because they're just these really long numbers. And these are all the different shared ledger projects that you can use to post your DIDs. There's a bunch of different active methods. You can make one too. And they define how to create, read, and update these on whatever ledger you're targeting. And there's a universal resolver. So if you have an active DID method and you want it to be resolved and readable across this network, because this is the irony. It's decentralized, but you got to find them, and we need some common stuff. So this is the basic building blocks. And these are the core components. You have the identifier owner, They have a wallet in which they generate their decentralized identifier. They now can have a place in the cloud to do more advanced things with more complex data. And they have the identifier itself in the ledger. And they use this as a routing to find each other and connect. And then you can have a shared communication channel with PKI because the public keys are sitting there, right? So it's a way to get PKI out to the masses because me managing it, my Thunderbird, isn't really working. And importantly, this could also be an institution. It doesn't have to be just another person, right? So we can build connections between people and organizations. So who cares about really long numbers? Not that many people. You do, I know. But we can use them to layer on more meaningful information about people. And the province of British Columbia lent me their slides. And when you show up and you present credentials in paper form, they're not necessarily that believable. So, and the other challenge is, how do you know anything's true without phoning home to the centralized database at the UC Berkeley where I got my degree, or the state of California where I have my driver's license from? It's really none of their business where I present the credentials that I earned from them or received from them. And it costs if you do try and phone home, it's creating data exhaust. They're knowing everywhere you go. So we have this architecture where you have the wallet and the hub, the issuer, this is like the state of California, and the verifier, the bar that I go to present my ID, and a shared ledger. And this all connects up where we post a DID document, and the issuer wants to know before they issue it to me, that the credential to me, that I actually control a particular DID. And then they also post the keys that they use to post it. They send over the actual data and the verifiable credential. And then I have it in my wallet and I control who I share it with. And if I want to present it to the bar, great. And they check, like, does she really own the DID? Yep. Okay, does the signature match? Yeah, we can believe the credential. And this doesn't happen. The verifier is not talking to the issuer. They're checking the signatures using the ledger. No PII ends up on the blockchain. Yes, this is really good. Anybody doing a thing in this area is like we're putting even hash PII. So individuals have their own identities, and what about the organization? So I'm going to jam through this super fast, which is to say British Columbia is working on this to issue verifiable credentials not just to people, but to organizations. So that instead of businesses getting all this stuff in paper form, that's the sign, they're getting it in the digital form. Just play one more time. They get it in a digital form. So they're issuing the certificate into the business's digital wallet, and they're able to present it. And the cool thing about what British Columbia is doing is they decided to collect all of the public credentials of businesses into one place and let business owners come and pick it all up. Be like, here's all the claims from the province of British Columbia, go do business with them. Which is a very cool way to kickstart these things, because the challenges with all this stuff is, how do you get it starting to be used? So now Mary has her credentials in her digital wallet, specifically about her business. And her agent helps her connect, right? So this is really about putting software in people's hands that helps them do that. So now we have organizations with identities and people with identities and these open standards for making it all connect. So I'm really excited about this. I mean, like many of you, there's this new emerging, I think of it as layer 8 on the internet, where we are starting to own and control our own identities. And I have this quote from Alexander Galway. I think protocols are really critical. Protocol is a language that regulates the flow, directs net space, codes relationships, and connects life forms. It's the etiquette for autonomous agents. And that's what we're all here doing, is building these new protocols that will be how control it happens with decentralization is in the protocols. This is me. I invite you all to come, as Wendy said, to the Internet Identity Workshop, which is October 23 to 25 in Mountain View. This is a project I'm working on with my colleague Shireen, Human First Tech, to make sure this next generation of the web is inclusive and diverse, and we address some of the problems that we know about already on the web from 40 years of being social on it. And I just joined the Wireline team to help them with their product development in the field of identity, and we plan to even go beyond the stuff I shared in this slide presentation today. So thank you so much.
We have just a little time for questions. Any questions for Kalia? Let's go with Stefan first, and then I'll bring it back to you.
How does a credential get revoked? Like if I,
They post that it got revoked. There's people working on that challenge. Yes. I can introduce you to those guys if you want to know more. What's PII? Personally identifiable information. Sorry, that was a little bit inside baseball.
As opposed to PKI?
That's public key encryption. Infrastructure. Yes, encryption infrastructure. Okay. It is not. So there is a bunch of work going on around DIDs for everything, like IoT devices having DIDs and servers having DIDs and the which? What's spiffy? Okay.
Let's use the mic so that the live stream folks can hear you too.
Can you use the same long number and store it in multiple places? Is that what you use that middle part of method for, or scheme?
So you can use the same long number, and you can have multiple keys associated with it, so you could use it from different devices. There's also the idea that you might have hundreds, if not thousands, of DIDs associated with different aspects so that it's not all linked together. Both things are true.
Can you store it on multiple permanent store things? Or it looked like you had three parts of your identifier, DID, then like Bitcoin or something, or IPFS or something, and then your long number. Can you put your long number and store it in multiple different places?
That's a good question. Could you put it on multiple chains?
Yeah, I'm not sure which chain is going to live.
But you're going to have hundreds. So I would say the better strategy is to make hundreds of DIDs on multiple chains, and then you'll be fine.
This is a comment both to John, and you don't really need to use long numbers. You could just use URL on a date, because the timestamp makes the globally unique ID globally unique for all time. But I always thought the real problem in identity was, my favorite quote is from Through the Looking Glass. What did the caterpillar ask Alice from the toadstool? Who are you? And what did Alice answer? I don't know for sure, sir. I know who I was this morning, but I've changed several times since then. Mm-hmm. And so how do you deal with people changing identity or merging identities or changing who they are? Especially for organizations.
So this is this is an infrastructure to support many of the things our communities and many hard problems we've been trying to solve for a long time. And the main thing it solves is, how do I own and control an identifier that I can authenticate against that isn't going to disappear? And now we can figure out how to use it for all sorts of things. It's like baseline infrastructure to do new interesting things for people and thing and all sorts of identities, because identifiers are now free and cheap and resolvable with public keys. Pretty cool.
So I would like to make sure, I don't need a mic. I would like to make So when I was looking at these new wacky things that are really technical, I go, okay, so some company will create a web service that will be the front end to all this crap, so no human could ever deal with it, right? So nobody, the moment you walk out this door, nobody cares about anything you talk about, and they want to know use cases. They want to know, what is the benefit for me, and why do I care?
Right. You don't even spend a long numbers.
Good. And as Brewster asks, is it, you have to focus on what are the benefits. Why is the user doing that? So I like comparing it to a driver's license. Why is it better?
Okay. So this was a presentation for a very technical audience here at the Internet Archive. And there are many companies building real products that use this, that a human will never see all this nice, really beautiful plumbing we've built. And you will see, our demo hour is literally sold out. Like, there's more people who want to demo real working products that use this stuff than we have room for. So come.
On that note, let's hear it for Kalia Young. Thank you very much, Kalia. So I'm going to ask Mark Nadal to set up. And while Mark is setting up, we're going to give Mark Cantor a few minutes to talk. Mark Cantor, if you have not heard him, he's the gentleman in the back. And a long time ago, in a year 1991, he started a company called Macromedia.
Wrong.
No?
84.
84. 84.
Kicked me out.
Okay. He exited a company called Macromedia in a year called 1991, and he is here to talk about something a little different. Yeah. So, Mark, why don't you stand right here? Okay. Then you'll be better in the line of sight.
So it takes a lot of tech and a lot of infrastructure and coders to do all this techie stuff. And so we need something really, really lightweight that Matt Mullenweg put into the WordPress code, and now every WordPress file has it. Right? You can't expect the real world to go jump through all these hoops and attend all these conferences and raise venture capital. It's got to be really lightweight and really simple. Part of that principle is also that something like what Kalia just described works with what you guys do and works with Tim Berners-Lee. It works with anybody. It's got to be completely lightweight and completely democratic, I guess you'd say. So there used to be these things called microcodes. We put them into our web pages. And Tontik Chelik and the whole DWeb crew, microformats. And they built a whole effort around standardizing some microformats, which were basically these schemas. So I wrote a book 11 years ago, 12 years ago, which took that and said, well, let's create a schema of schemas that were all the different things that we needed to do to share and do a distributed web. So here's all my ID key things and all the rules and things about ID, and here's all the things about all my media files, and here's all the things about my access privileges, or everything. And every single one of those things would be a schema. And it's in my top web page on my root file. So I land on this page, and in there it says all the things that I'm willing to share and all the things I'm not willing to share, and these are the rules I pay attention to. This is the mafia or mafias that I'm a member of. And these are the rules and hoops you have to jump through to deal with me. And that would mean that every single media file, every single thing I did would be tagged and have this wrapped around it. And you cannot ask users to download and set up their own server, okay? So it has to have a system where vendors run this thing that then are the equivalent of Flickr that does this, and Airbnb that does this, and every Uber ride I take, and everything. So it's completely lightweight and very idealistic microformats, schema of schemas. I call them dashboard containers before Docker. So I get to use the word container. But anyway, so part of that means that the more the merrier. God bless everything they do at the Internet Archive. God bless the blockchain. God bless Tim Berners-Lee. May everyone go off, fight their own battles. There are the Shahs of Sunset Boulevard that are doing this for the Persians. And there's this entire firewall inside mainland China, and they're going to be really organized. And then there's the mob and the Russians and all these people and the hippies. And last I heard, all the really evil Trump supporters aren't just going away. They're really organized too. And each of these people are their own webs. And so we have to design systems that can interconnect these things together. That's what I want to talk about. That's why I'm here, to make sure that it's not just blockchain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Nicely said. So I think it was 2015, 2014, there was a meeting, kind of an early meeting, and Juan Bonet was there. He went on to found IPFS, and Faraz was there. He went on to found WebTorrents. Matthias and Max with Dat were there. And also, Mark Nadal was there. And they were all saying, oh, well, it's all about hashes. No, it's about Merkle hashes. No, it's about torrents. And Mark was there saying, no, you guys got it all wrong. It's about graphs. And in the years since, they have been busy building out their vision of what a decentralized stack would look like. And Mark was in Salt Lake City doing the same thing because his wife was getting her PhD. That's a good place to be and a good reason to be there. But she got her PhD, and now he's back to show why graphs and not any of those other things are really what we need. But I hear that you're actually going to talk about something a little bit more narrow, because Gun, the technology that Mark has been developing with his team Priya, is here, and he's been working with Marty Malmi up in Finland. They want to do it all, right? You want to do decentralized databases, which we used for the DWeb, but DWeb Internet Archive. You want to do you want to do bandwidth. Yep. You want to do identifiers. But you're here today, you said, to talk about how to do cryptographically secure password resets in decentralized applications. Okay. Yeah. And if you want to know part of the bigger vision of Gun also, I'm sure Mark would be happy to tell you about that. So here he is, Mark Nadal.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Wendy. I did decide to zoom out and talk about a few other things, but I will get to doing password resets inside of decentralized systems. So there's 5 things that you should remember. First, the sound of keyboard clicker versus keyboard. Nope, not that. Nope, yes, we're on. Here we go. The sound of dial-up. I didn't get high-speed internet until 2014. So growing up, this sound of dial-up was a promise that I could get connected and put in touch with everybody else in the world. A promise that I could be put in touch not with the school ground bully, but other people online. So in 1998, when I first used dial-up, 150 million people were online. 10 years later, 2008, 1.5 billion people. 10 times in 10 years. In 2008, Facebook had 200 million people. And now in 2018, they have over 2 billion people. Again, 10 times in 10 years. And it seems like as we, at the very beginning, were trying to decentralize the web way back in the day, that over time, we've kind of lost our way and figured that the only way to scale up is to leave it to centralized monopolies. And we can only blame ourselves, because in the case of Bitcoin, it can only do 3 transactions per second. A lot of our work in decentralization, that yes, it is a fact that corporations were able to give users experiences that they enjoyed that were better than what maybe the decentralized web could do. But something that's been really exciting from us in our community, Gun, just this last week, somebody dropped a GPU bomb on one of our communities. Peer-to-peer Reddit. It's called notabug.io, after the Aaron Swartz quote that freedom and speech is not a bug, it is a principle, it is a value. The GPU bot did 1 million upvotes on peer-to-peer Reddit, averaging about 3,000 upvotes per second. Compare that to Twitter, which does 6,000 tweets per second. Compare that to Bitcoin, which does 3 transactions per second. Compare that to real Reddit, which does 50 comments per second. So 3,000 upvotes per second compared to Twitter at 6,000 tweets per second on $15 million worth of monthly hardware. But in peer-to-peer Reddit, it's fully decentralized, and it was only on $99 worth of hardware. So scale exists, and it's something we've been working on for the last 4 years, largely because of the comment that Wendy made, is that a lot of people are focused on immutability hashes. But if you really want things to scale, you have to have an index, and that index needs to update quickly, and that index then needs to mutate, so that way by the time things change, you have the most recent data. You're not then trying to create an index of the immutable data that you're going back to find out what the most recent update is. But that is for a separate chat. In the process of now creating these scalable, decentralized applications, you might say, well, now if we can scale up, it's a problem of speed. How are we going to get these dApps out to fight Facebook and Google and get experiences better? It's going to take time for us to create this. But no, the decentralized Reddit was built in 1 week, just a few months ago. And it has 1,000 daily active users on it. Compared to the blockchain world, right, where CryptoKitties is supposedly the most popular dApp, it only has about 500 daily active users. So we already have more daily active users on these decentralized applications that don't require paying to play. That's because people, lay people, at the end of the day, just want to use these experiences. And then just 4 weeks before the Decentralized Web Summit, Wendy and Brewster had never heard of me. Within 4 weeks, they then had me connect with Mitra, who is leading the decentralization of the Internet Archive. And in 1 week, Mitra integrated Gun such that it was running at the conference that even Brewster was presenting on. In 1 week.
With a couple of hiccups.
With a couple of hiccups, yes.
We don't blame Brewster for that. So you're the one we get to blame?
We get to blame all of us, right? Share and distribute and decentralize the hiccups. So if people can build peer-to-peer Reddit with 1,000 daily active users in 1 week, if Internet Archive can start decentralizing itself in 1 week, there's also another place. D.Tube, it has over 1 million monthly active visitors on it. Over 1 million, between 1 million to 3 million monthly active visitors, and they're built on top of Gun as well. So how can we get these decentralized apps out faster? If you hit up this URL, gun.eco/docs/to-do-dap, it is case sensitive, thanks to GitHub, but you can build a multi-user collaborative to-do app in 50 lines of HTML and JavaScript and have it deployed in 5 minutes on an interactive tutorial. Okay? So it is actually easy to build these things, and you see that as you log into the system from different places, I notice that they're actually coming from file protocol, but when I log in and do the update, it syncs between both of them. You're going to build this in the 5 minutes. It syncs instantly, and it's only 50 lines of HTML and JavaScript, and it's fully decentralized. So you could actually build these dApps quickly, in the same way that Mitra did, in the same way that Goldfish did. Goldfish is the anonymous founder of peer-to-peer Reddit. We don't know his name. It is fast to build these things. So now you might be wondering, well, I noticed that there is a username and a password up there. That can't possibly be decentralized. That can't possibly be secure and end-to-end encrypted. No, I am bullish on this fact that if we're trying to get people to, like my grandma, to share private keys, that they're going to handle it in a very insecure manner. So we need to create experiences like Twitter, like Facebook, that people already know. In fact, they don't even know they're using peer-to-peer Reddit. They don't even know that they're using decentralized YouTube. They don't even know that the decentralized Internet Archive is decentralized. And so in the last year that I've been in the Bay Area, I've been meeting a lot of blockchain folks, and they're all talking about how doing key recovery and account recovery is this hard, unsolved problem. It sounds like the DID community actually has some solutions there. But a lot of people in the blockchain space are all talking about how this is a hard, unsolved problem. No, the algorithm for it is actually pretty simple. We've been doing this for 2 years. If you want to know about how the cryptography works, okay, if you're not familiar with AES, ECD, ECDH, PBKDF2, you can hit up this URL, gun.eco/doc/C. C stands for security, encryption, and authorization. And we have 1-minute animated explainers that explain cartoon cryptography with cooking analogies. Now, you don't need to know this stuff if you want to use the system, but education is important, and all the stuff is open source, MIT, zlib, Apache 2 license. But you, with this very simple algorithm that can fit on a single slide and make it look pretty, are capable of doing password resets, multi-friend account recovery, and a whole bunch of other things. So, the technology, the cryptography for this all exists out there. I've spent 4 years hiding in my basement trying to build that, and I realized, oh, I should probably actually go and talk to some people because I thought people also knew about these algorithms. I guess I was incorrect. So what I want to stress, though, is that it's not about the technology. The technology here is actually done. It's already built, and it's running yesterday in scale in production. Logic and code have inevitable solutions to them, and they're easy if you sit down for a few years and just think clearly. The hard part is around the politics and the social aspects. So one of the worst things that's happening right now is that, guess what? All of my efforts, whether that be Gun, whether that be DTube, whether that be peer-to-peer Reddit, whether that be Bitcoin, whether that be Ethereum, whether that be Filecoin, are all susceptible to an attack, which is that currently bandwidth is not decentralized. In fact, a lot of the miners in Bitcoin are hard-coded into the Bitcoin source code. That makes it a really easy target for governments to ban, censor, and block. And maybe you don't care about the governments, maybe you care about net neutrality, end-to-end encryption. Well, in that case, then telecoms can just be like, oh, well, we don't know that this is YouTube or Facebook or Google, so therefore we're going to throttle it. Well, say you do use YouTube, Facebook, and Google. Well, now they're mining your data. The goal with Axe, which is the next thing that our community is focusing on, is to build an incentive around decentralizing bandwidth such that relay peers, if you aren't able to connect directly through WebRTC, that relay peers cannot mine your data because it's end-to-end encrypted, okay, using the identity system that we're able to encrypt data point to point. And rather than trying to mine data, they mine bandwidth, and that they can then use the bandwidth on their own means or convert into Bitcoin or something else. So, this is a political problem, whether it be governments, whether it be telecom industry, or whether that be corporations. But again, the politics and net neutrality is just a distraction. What matters most is people, okay? In 1998, I had dial-up. I did not get high-speed internet until 2014, and in that time, I went from 0 to now being able to present in front of you, thanks to Wendy and Brewster, but also having lunch dates with Peter Thiel, Mark Benioff, and Tim Draper. In a very short amount of time, the internet let me escape that school ground bully. It let me escape where I came from. The internet let me meet new people, people that I ought to be connected to. And that was just on dial-up, right? Well, later getting connected to other people was through the high-speed internet. The most important thing is that we ought to be able to connect with people of all ages, all colors, of all financial backgrounds, of all religious and political persuasions. And that's why we need to move the decentralized web forward. And as Brewster so eloquently states, and I actually agree with semantics, to lock the web open. So, thank you. Questions, anybody?
How do you mine bandwidth?
Can I send you an hour-and-a-half long talk that I did? Yeah.
You can point us off of that.
Okay, yes. If you go to axe.eco, the video on that will be explaining a bunch of the different algorithms, the CRDT that I use to get around blockchain problems and bottleneck and not having to do immutable hashes. It's a pretty technical talk and pretty long, and I talk fast. And then there's also a cartoon explainer at axe.eco if you want the layman explanation of it. Yes, so there's 3 categories. Blockchains say we're only going to perform an operation after we have validated that each operation is successful. That's very slow. Okay, it's actually the same thing that airlines do when you go and check in at a kiosk, is they should have actually just pushed that to the kiosk, but when you're trying to get through TSA and you type in your number in the kiosk, it's having to check some globally consistent database out there in the world and then come back to you, and TSA is counting down before your flight goes out. So that is just fundamentally slow. Every operation has to wait until the next one goes forward. The second category is what several new blockchains are doing, is they proceed assuming that nothing is going wrong until they hit a problem, like state channels, lightning channel, whatever the buzzword is lately, plasma, and then they roll back that block and then move forward, okay? But that will become a compounding problem because when a problem happens, you have to roll back while also maintaining all the forward state. So the third category is not having any governance. You move forward. When an error happens, you make sure that that error only affects the people involved in the transaction, okay, rather than the global state. So that way, 99.99999% rest of the system can move forward, and it's only your strand, your signature chain specifically, that it has to go through a dispute process. Then that dispute process goes into what you call a court system, where you just show the digital signature of the two people who have the double spent coin, okay? And if you take those two ingredients plus a consensus algorithm, I'm actually going to potentially not require a consensus algorithm, potentially use the CRDTs inside of GUN, which is a separate explanation. But in the third category, then let's say Alice was the fraudster, Bob was the person who got a double spent coin, and Carl was the person who got a double spent coin. The consensus algorithm, or the CRDT in our system, will choose that Bob gets to keep the coin. So we don't roll back anything. Okay, we actually just let Bob move forward. But what about poor Carl? Well, actually what we do for Carl is we forcibly, with all three ingredients combined, the 51% compute cannot do this by itself, we forcibly take a coin out of Alice, the fraudster's bank account of equal or greater value and give that to Carl. So now Carl's able to continue forward. So now the system doesn't have to roll back. We're able to have an optimistic system that is running continuously forward. When an error happens, it's isolated only to the people who have been affected, and that can then be submitted into a dispute resolution. And that dispute resolution, rather than rolling back, okay, because that's what is going to cause compounding problems, then moves both items forward by punishing the fraudster. So it's a purely economic system. So hopefully that was too fast or decent enough. Okay. Great. Any other questions?
Talk about some app that was getting 1 million users a month. Right? You talked about some app and you were saying this DApp scales, right? What do they do on that app? What do 1 million people a month do?
Watch videos of kittens. D.tube. Kittens. Yeah, D.tube. It's just a decentralized version of YouTube. You can go to it in your URL, just D.tube. And it's because you're right. Most people are not going to be paying to play, right? They just want to go to Reddit, rant about politics. They want to go to YouTube and zone out. They don't want to pay to play on those blockchains. And so decentralization represents good experiences for users that we can move forward without having to have users figure out this blockchain stuff. Does that make sense?
No.
Oh.
So, as somebody new to the DWeb, I want to create a site where lots of people go to and lots of traffic happens, and the traffic is free?
Yes, so that's a good question. Initially, you're either going to help in running the bandwidth mining system, so you might run it yourself, in which case you're paying for the traffic. Or let's say you don't care about running some backend, you don't care about running Wi-Fi mesh networks, you don't care about running network layer infrastructure, in which case, if you're just a front-end person, you're going to be paying the bandwidth miners for hosting all of that bandwidth. And then slowly over time, we're able to take software or network layer bandwidth decentralization and move it into physical hardware level decentralization through like Wi-Fi mesh networks and stuff like that. In which case it becomes 0.00005 times cheaper than the current bandwidth rates.
Who pays for the kittens right now?
Right now it is DTube itself is providing their own mining servers, and so they're just paying the fiat for it. But they care about having good user experiences, and as they get more and more users onto their site, the network effect becomes larger and larger and larger. And ultimately, they then hope that...
Compare that to like a torrent system.
They're using torrenting underneath as well. So they're using GUN plus WebTorrent or IPFS for the video streaming.
Okay.
But unfortunately, a lot of the torrenting systems are unreliable, so they're having to have a backup where they run their own torrent backup to help host that, just because of the flakiness of the decentralization, but we're working on fixing that.
I just wanted to see if I was following you, Mark. Many people look at Ethereum and the incredible kind of vitality of that marketplace and say, well, that's where, the blockchain is really where all the good stuff is happening. And you're talking about CryptoKitties, which is, if there is a killer app in Ethereum, it's CryptoKitties, and it broke the whole Ethereum blockchain, and it has about 500 users per day. And yet there are decentralized services running on Gun and WebTorrent, not on the blockchain, that have 1 million users a month. That's the decentralized YouTube or DTube. And so your point that when you talk about scale, you're looking in the wrong direction if you're looking at Ethereum, because we're already creating what could be the killer app for the decentralized web that is scaling much faster. Is that the point?
Very well said.
Oh, thank you. Does anyone want to challenge that, though?
Not challenged, but basically confirmed. Like, we had the exact same experience. Like, I was a Bitcoin developer. I worked on XRP Ledger at Ripple, and you just have a fundamental scalability issue if you want to have global consensus. And so if you want to scale beyond that, you need basically lighter weight protocols like what we're doing with IntelliLedger, what you're doing with Gun. So I would totally agree with that. Not very interesting, sorry, but I think it's just true.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more thing? Actually, it's a plead. Before the Decentralized Web Summit, there's been another sort of open question we have. We can't figure out how to do D-payments on the DWeb. The other is, can we move our, say, archive.org username and password to easily smoothly move over to the decentralized Internet Archive? Can we kind of have a migration path over in such a way that these identities work better, but they're still kind of easy, to use, kind of like a username and password? And in the identity thing, having an upgrade path would be great. Having worked in the IETF, and we still don't have IPv6, and we still have 32-bit addresses because we're idiots. There was an upgrade path problem. I think I understood that you could help with that, but I never quite figured it out, and we haven't gotten there yet.
This is somewhat confidential, but I'll mention it anyways because it's important to get people working on the network effects moving forward. So in Q1 of 2019, we're going to be launching an initiative that I already have MetaMask helping out with, where if you have maybe the Internet Archive browser extension or the Coral browser extension, maybe you guys want to participate. The more people that can mix together from these different networks, we'll start automatically being able to scrape all of your Google searches, all of your Facebook posts, all of your tweets into your own secure, encrypted personal vault. Now, as you're just browsing the web, you might run across DTube or peer-to-peer Reddit or Internet Archive, and suddenly, all this history that you yourself have privately scraped while just using Facebook and Google and other services would suddenly become accessible to the Internet Archive if you, as the user, decide to log in and disclose that information. And so now we're talking about potentially millions and millions of users that are able to take their full GDPR compliant history into the Internet Archive, Coral, and other places. So yeah, that's something we're working on. GDPR is, I don't remember the general data protection requirement, and it's a European requirement that Facebook and Google and other large services, if they want to operate in Europe, have to let users export their data and or delete it.
So we have a unique situation here. You're making some claims, and you're sitting in the house with a guy who tried to demo it, and it didn't work. Now, my own analysis of that being around buggy code for 40 years, was that Brewster first showed the URL to everybody. They all went there, and then he decided to go there. So, you know, for me, my naive eyes is, well, everyone went there and prevented Brewster from getting there, right? Is that approximately what happened?
I think so. Yeah, I made a mistake by going and suggesting everybody go to this thing. You
should have first gone there and then let everybody know the URL, right?
The diagnosis that I got was when I went to it, I got an Nginx failure. And so that means I couldn't have even gone to the bootloader. And once you get to the bootloader, then you can't even get to IPFS, WebTorrent and Gun, and YJS. So in my case, my assessment is that, yeah, the server got flooded with a bunch of requests. Those requests timed out because it was taking too long for them to reply. And this isn't the fault of Brewster. This isn't the fault of IPFS or Gun or me or anybody else. It's actually a fault of domains route to a single machine. When you have thousands of people trying to access one machine, of course, the load on the physical resources. Yes.
In this world right now, DNS, right? And then you want to go to this decentralized world. Well, day one, especially when you're demoing it. So what would have been the alternative? How would that have worked that it didn't crash?
So unfortunately, right now, we're going to have to bootstrap the web through known IP addresses and URLs because that's what the web is built off of. However, Brewster does have in mind, right, things like the Internet Archive browser extension or MetaMask has in mind, where potentially the browser, or in the case of Brendan Eich with Brave, that the browser itself could start doing protocol resolution that doesn't have to go through the domain space. However, it is going to first start with making sure these dApps are accessible via URLs.
Okay, so in layman's talk, there would be a special site that when you, it's kind of like a front end, and you'd go there, and it would do the load balancing and take every 10th one and just send it, some of it to Cloudflare and some of it to AWS and some of it to Akamai or whatever.
My favorite bootstrap idea at the moment is an extension that looks for DWeb in the server, anywhere in it, and it basically says, I know how to deal with this, and it starts up this JavaScript thing to go and handle it. And so that if you don't have that, it still tries to go there. And so it works on the existing web browsers, and if you haven't have an extension, then it immediately goes into the decentralized world. So it's basically kind of a specialized, if you put dweb.archive.org, you win. If it's dweb.reddit.com, you win. If you put it in dweb.me, it wins. Anyway, that's my favorite sort of upgrade path at the moment.
Another unfortunate thing that Feross has been fighting for several years is that WebRTC sessions are not sticky. WebRTC lets us do peer-to-peer connectivity in the browser that wouldn't have to go through the domain system. But browsers, for security reasons or legitimate reasons, won't let your browser tab stay as a persistent peer. So that way, every single time I refresh, I unfortunately, even if I'm using the peer-to-peer web, have to bootstrap through a signaling server is what they call it. The only way to fix that, though, is to have really good IPv6 and telecoms not blocking IPv6 and Wi-Fi routers not blocking IPv6. And a user would have to have a special browser installed that knows how to speak that. So there's still a long road ahead at both the hardware and at the router side. And so right now, for me, the upgrade path is making sure that, yes, you go to notabug.io or DTube, and as soon as you hit those sites, you have a bootloader that bootstraps into whatever peers you can connect to. But that will have the same scaling problems that was demoed the other day until we can actually get telecom, hardware, Wi-Fi, and physical routers and the operating system itself running these things. And that is going to be a good decade of work.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much. Great presentation. Hey, you know, Brewster said he wanted to make this fun, and so let's end on a fun note. Brewster has a vision of how to make the DWeb fun through DWeb Camp, and I want him to tell you about it and then give us your true feedback about whether this is something that sounds good to you or not. Come on up,
advertise it? Yeah. Have you guys ever been to Chaos Communications Camp? No. Burning Man. Yeah. Hacker Conference. All right. So a thought for, instead of doing another summit next year, to try to do something that would be kind of fun, but a very different kind of gathering, and do it as a camp. So find some place nice to be, and go and stay there for 3 to 5 days. Set up camp, break bread, sleep, and have high bandwidth and really interesting people to hang out with for a while. So have a place for people to gather and have talks and such like that, but not a conference, but a camp. My favorite, I went to the Chaos Communications Camp. It's every 4 years in East Berlin, and I've gone a couple of times, and it's again this next summer, and it was just like, wow, this is completely great. We could regroove a generation by having people go and spend time with each other. So get people out of their cubicles in whatever companies they were in, and hang out with each other and learn something completely breathtaking and new. And I thought sort of having the general theme of decentralization as opposed to sort of DWeb, but again, any sort of decentralization I think is actually kind of a useful, I don't know, North Star towards what we might be able to sort of use as a general theme. Of course, people will talk about and do whatever they want to do. So what do you think? Would it be worth 3-5 days going someplace? The theory is sort of within an hour of here, but the idea is that it's far enough away that you'd go there and you probably wouldn't, leave for lunch, and camp out and hang out and be there.
I have 2 kids. Would
Yes.
it be appropriate
Yes.
to bring kids?
Yes. The last Chaos Communication Camp I was at, there was a lot of kids and stuff around. They placed it in an area that had right next to a lake, which was really great. One of the key parts of these problems is finding the place that will allow a bunch of hackers to go and hang out there for a period of time. But
Back in the 90s, I was at an info camp, a tag camp, and UC Berkeley has the high school has a couple days. They don't really call it camp, but basically being able to sort of like either stay there overnight, everybody, or just kind of go home and then come back. So being able to manage your own sleeplessness rather than having forced is kind of great. I found.
But you're not talking about tents, are you? You're talking about maybe a conference center like at Marshall.
I was thinking tents. One of the nice things about that is it's a lot cheaper. So you can make it non-invitational, so it's open to anybody, and hopefully it would attract younger people, right? Than those that basically spend $1,000, in some Monterey whatever, blah. So. And it doesn't have to be sponsored by, your favorite.com here, right? It could be organic.
And how unconferencey do you mean? Any structure at all? Or
I don't know. There's looking for people that would be interested in evolving it, and especially people that have been to other camps. And they can be of different, they can be yoga camps. There are lots of different kinds of camps that are popular now. And so how do we structure something well? And at least the Chaos Communications Camp grew from from the Chaos Communications Club up from hundreds of people. Now it's a couple thousand, or 4,000 or 5,000 people. But it took them a long time to do that. They have a Congress every Christmas time, and that's now 30,000 people. So that's more of a real conference-y type thing. But it's basically the whole social side of Europe gets together, the social side of the tech community. So can we do the same sort of social side of the tech community, but for Bay Area or beyond? So anyway, really interested in this. Yes, Mark.
Could be in conjunction with a conference, doing both.
Sure. Yeah, we're just trying to figure it out now. And Wendy's spearheading this to try to gosh, how do we how do we do something awesome together?
I think it'd be fun, but I think you need some structure. So maybe you're already imagining it. I think it should be. So that is.
Yeah, I think Chaos Communications Camp came around. It had sort of a tent. They had different talks, and you could schedule those sorts of things. But as it grew, it sort of like Burning Man. it has actually many different structures within it. Well, actually, so, but maybe as we start, we'll start with having some kind of schedule so people can go to the extent that they want to. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Food camp is great. I'm hoping it's non-invitational. So the food camp and Hackers Conference are invitational.
So I think if you have 20 acres you'd like to donate, come see me. If you know how to do bandwidth in the forest, come see me. If you know how to cook, if you want to help take care of kids, if you want to do programs, it's a tabula rasa right now. We're just trying to start something new, something fun, something that would bring people together and be, as you say, regrooving a generation.
You'd be transformed at the output.
Into a rugged mountain map.
Right.
And women. And women. Hey, so thanks so much. We're thinking of doing this maybe the second Tuesday of every month. Does that seem like a reasonable? Yeah.
Worth it to us.
Yeah.
Has to be worth it.
Yeah. 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 I didn't get the word out too early this last time, but if we got the word out, last time we had 110 people. This time it's nice and small. The time before that we had about 40 people. So, it's just get together, share your technology, ask questions, eat pizza. That's kind of so far our vision, and maybe have some tables afterwards that people could break into. But okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. Good night, live stream people.